Hi everyone, welcome to this new deck tech video, and today we're going to talk about a deck that I've been running for a very long time, and actually this is the deck I've won the very first community tournament ever organized for Star Wars Unlimited. So I've been quite known in the community for being the Vader player, and obviously the deck is now very different to what it was back then, since we got all the cards. And I would like to show you what is my take on the deck and how do I run it to its full potential. So Vader is one of the most expensive leader in the game, and in my opinion, is the most powerful leader that costs uh, more than 6 resources. And what is very powerful with Vader is the fact that he has 8 health, so he's very difficult to kill. And he can kill multiple units at once when he attacks by himself with his fire attack, but also with his 2 attack bonus. And he also has, in my opinion, a very strong leader ability. So even when he's not deployed, he still has a significant impact on the game. Um, Something that one of the first mechanism that jumped to my mind when I first started playing Star Wars Unlimited is that whenever you are ramping in Star Wars Limited, so whenever you play cards like Resupply or Super Laser Technician that allows you to get additional resources, uh, as it is in any other card game, it allows you to play a very expensive card faster. But one of the unique aspects of Star Wars Unlimited is that it also allows you to play your leader faster and earlier in the game. And this is extremely impactful. And this is the reason why I believe that ramp as a mechanism is one of the most powerful one in the game. And obviously the more powerful your leader is, the more powerful your leader is, the more impactful is the ramp. And the fact that Vader costs 7 means that there's going to be multiple points in the game where you can play ramp and it's going to have a double impact on the game, because impact on your cards and impact on your leader. So that's why naturally we play green with Vader, and I think that Vader, more than any other leader in the game, is the most dependent on the ramp. Therefore, in my opinion, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to run Vader without green. And at least at a competitive level, of course. So here's the global idea of this deck. So this is, as you can expect, a relatively rampy, control-y deck. So the idea is that early stage of the game, we're going to be trying to ramp as much as possible to try to get our expensive cards out, as well as our Vader, and then we're going to overpower our opponent into later stage of the game. So we're playing some very powerful late game cards. We're playing the ramp, obviously. And then the rest of the deck is pretty much built in order to survive. And we're trying to survive with extremely efficient removal, and units that can interact with the opponent and even gain us a little bit of HP, repair our base, and have some card that can basically wipe the board, like bombing runs and overwhelming barrage. And those cards will help us survive as long as we can to get into that late game situation. So there's multiple versions of Vader Ramp. Some that are greedier than others. What I mean by greedy is like there's some version which ignores the early game a bit more than others. I believe that my version of the deck, which is this version, is one of the least greedy, in the sense that it really focuses a lot on surviving the early game. It has anti-aggro cards in the main deck, which normally card you would think about them in the sideboard. This deck plays them in the main deck. So for the base, we are playing Energy Conversion Lab, and the previous deck I've talked about was pretty much the exception in that rule. Pretty much every green deck plays Energy Conversion Lab as a base, and the reason is because it is by far the strongest base in the game. If you have the right units, giving in ambush to a unit is just extremely impactful. So in this deck, basically the card that benefit the most from Energy Conversion Lab is Super Laser Technician, and I'll explain in more details why later. Consort Star Viper also benefits a lot for ECL. If you have the initiative, you can ambush right away with Consort Star Viper, kill something and gain some HP back, which is just extremely impactful against aggro. Ruthless Raider also like in the Energy Conversion Lab a lot, and also Cell Block Guard to some extent. Cell Block Guard and of course Seasoned Short Trooper ECL for 4 damage into something also works pretty well. So without further ado, let's jump into the card by card analysis, where we're going to start, of course, with the cheapest cards. So there you go. And first we got Death Star Stormtrooper. Death Star Stormtrooper is basically in the early stage of the game. You are looking to for cards that can interact with the opponent unit, so basically trade with them. And the most dangerous unit that you can be facing in the early stage of the game is either going to be Sabine or Battlefield Marine. And Death Star Stormtrooper with his 3 attack can basically kill those units. So any turn 1 play that has 3 attack is going to be very valuable for us as a way to trade with our opponent in the early stages of the game and stabilize the board. Once again, the idea is to slow down the game to give us enough time to be able to ramp. So the Death Star Stormtrooper can do that. Another benefit of Death Star Stormtrooper is that you can combine it with your Vader ping right away. So you can play the Stormtrooper, and then you can use Darth Vader's ping to ping something, which can be very beneficial. If opponent does not play a turn 1 play or play a turn 1 play in space, we can still ping the space unit. And then we have a 3-1 on the board that can be used to put pressure on the opponent. Darth Vader is also a deck that can kill fairly quickly as well, because ping also deals direct damage to the base. We deal direct damage with Ruthless Raider, so it's a deck that can kill someone pretty quickly if given the opportunity. It's not a pure control deck that is simply just going to stall the game to a very long and drag the game out. It's a deck that once it gets online, it can kill fairly quickly. Next, we got Seasoned Short Trooper, which is naturally a very powerful option for a ramp deck, because we get to 6 resources quicker than other decks, in which case the Seasoned Short Trooper becomes a 4-3. So he's a little bit weaker as a turn 1 play because he doesn't have 3 attack and cannot trade with the Battlefield Marine or Sabine. But having a cheap unit that can have up to 4 attack is extremely powerful, especially for overwhelming Barrage. Because overwhelming Barrage really start to become a threat once you have unit that has 4 attacks, and Seasoned Short Trooper is the cheapest way to have a 4 attack unit on the board. So it's a card that I think is really good. You just need to kind of like wait it out and see and find the right play it at the right moment and hope that you get to those 6 resources, and having this unit that your opponent has to kill, otherwise is putting a huge threat on the board. That is definitely something that puts pressure on the opponent as well. Next, we got Viper Probe Droid, which is has the benefit, just like the Death Star Stormtrooper, to have 3 attacks, so can trade with those. The 2 health is also quite relevant, but the ability to look at the opponent hand is also something that we like, because since we are more of a reactive deck, at least in the early stage of the game, being able to see what your opponent has, so you can make your future decision making in terms of what you are going to be resourcing, and is quite relevant. So I really like Viper Probe Droid. It's going to be our another 2-drop that we're going to be running. So the deck runs 9 2-drop, 9 turn 1 play, which is kind of on the limit of what I would recommend. I think any less than this would make the deck quite inconsistent into its turn 1 play. With that being said, we are also running 3 copies of False Choke, and playing False Choke on turn 1 to kill a Sabine or a Battlefield Marine is a completely valid play. So if you take into account that we can play False Choke on turn 1, we actually have 12 ways to interact with the opponent early game, which is definitely enough statistically. Running now into our turn 2 play, we get the most important card of the deck. This is Super Laser Technician, which allows us to ramp. And the benefit of Super Laser Technician is that it can be used in combination with Energy Conversion Lab to come into play, kill something right away, and then converting into a resource that you can use right away as well. Obviously, we're not always going to do this. Only do this when there's something that has 2 health that you can kill, or if you absolutely need the resource right away. But other than this, do not the playing Super Laser Technician as just a without ECL is completely valid. And obviously the idea of the card is to give us some ramp, but also a little bit of interaction with the opponent and a bit of damage. It is one of the most important cards of the deck. You can also, another cool thing you can do with that Vader can do and no other deck can do is the fact that you can use ECL to ambush Super Laser Technician on turn 2. And then with the untap resources, you can use Vader's Ping, and this way you can actually kill something that has 3 health. And this is a line of play that we can do that no other deck can do, and that means that we're going to be using ECL Super Laser Technician a lot more often than other decks, because we have the ability to kill 3 health unit with that little combo. Next we got so maybe I'm going to talk about Resupply first. So Resupply is the other ramp card for the deck. Another thing I wanted to say about Super Laser Technician is that Vader has the ability to ping his own unit, so kill his own unit. So if your opponent does not play any ground unit in order to avoid us being able to use Super Laser Technician, we have the option of killing our own Super Laser Technician using Vader's Ping and get the resources anyway, which is something that you will do not super often, but relatively often, I would say. So then we got Resupply. So Resupply has the advantage of converting into resources right away without needing to be killed. But this resource comes into play exhausted. So I like this card sometimes better than Super Laser Technician, notably whenever I want to trigger the last resources that is needed for my Vader to come online. But obviously the main purpose of this card is redundancy. Vader, more than any other deck in the game, is dependent on ramp. Basically, if you don't draw any ramp, this deck is a lot weaker. And the more ramp and as opposed to some deck like Boba Green, which only needs 1 ramp, and then kind of want to resource all the other ramps, Vader wants multiple ramp in a game. Sometimes 2 and even 3 ramps can be beneficial. So now that we're touching on the subject, I'll explain you the line of play that allows you to play Darth Vader as early as turn 3. So basically the line of play is on turn 1 you play whatever you want. On turn 2 you either want to play a Resupply or Super Laser Technician, but if you're playing Super Laser Technician you do not want to use the ECL. So in order to accomplish this combo you need to have 3 ramps, by the way. 3 ramp cards. You don't have to draw them right away from turn 1, as long as you have them by turn 3, that's okay. So yeah, on turn 2, you play a Resupply or Super Laser Technician, but if you use Super Laser Technician, do not use ECL. And then on the second turn, you need to have 2 additional ramp cards, and one of those 2 ramp cards needs to be a Super Laser Technician, and the other one needs to be specifically a Resupply. So in total, you either need to have 2 Super Laser Technician and 1 Resupply, or 2 Resupply and 1 Super Laser Technician in total. So once you've done this, you are going to be using Super Laser Technician with an Energy Conversion Lab to attack it and get a ramp right away. So remember, we played a ramp on the turn before, so we are at 4 resources. Now you've used ECL Super Laser Technician, you get 5 resources, but you spent 3, but you got 1 back, so you get 3 back. And with the 3 remaining resources, you play Resupply, and that gives you the 7 resources you need to play Vader, and this allows you to play Vader as early as turn 3, which can be extremely impactful. Don't do this against every deck, but it is statistically it's something that you can pull out 1 out of 10 games, but you need to be aware that it exists to be able to play correctly. So because yeah, you need to sequence this specifically. So as I said, on turn 1, any of the 2 ramps. On turn 2, specifically Super Laser Technician first with ECL, ambush, get the card back, play Resupply, 7 resources. That's what you can and that's what you need for Vader on turn 3. Okay, so enough about ramp talks. Now let's talk about what we need to do to survive. And one of the cards that is key is Cell Block Guard. Cell Block Guard is going to be an excellent card against aggro, as it's going to block the Grand Arena. And it's also going to be an excellent card to pull out of Darth Vader. Darth Vader, the unit, Darth Vader, commander of the First Legion. And because it's basically makes Darth Vader a board stabilizer to that extent. Next we got Consortium Star Viper. So Star Viper is not an amazing card in a vacuum, but it does everything this deck wants, which is pretty much stabilizing the space arena in the early stages of the game, and also gain us some HP back, which is very important when we're going to be playing against aggro. So Star Viper, you want to use energy. It's a card that you often want to use with Energy Conversion Lab, ambush a space unit, kill that space unit, keep that unit around, and keep on putting pressure in space while giving us HP back. Just an excellent card that compensates some of the major weaknesses of the deck, and that's why it's in the main deck. Another card which is great at stabilizing the space arena is Imperial Interceptor. Comes into play, immediate impact on the game, kills another space unit. 3 damage is enough to kill the majority of space units. Also, little fun fact, if you are using Imperial Interceptor combined with Energy Conversion Lab, you can actually kill something that has 6 HP, so it's very useful if you're playing against Boba and you're expecting a fire spray. You can use ECL, play the Interceptor, and attack with Interceptor right away to kill that fire spray, which is pretty nice. But obviously the main purpose of the card is more to be played earlier in the game in order to kill the A-Wings, the red 3, and have a 3-2 on the board left after. If you're playing against double A-Wing, you can even ECL the Interceptor, attack into a A-Wing, kill that A-Wing, kill the other A-Wing with the when played ability, and you're left with a 3-1. So super impactful play like this that can really help you a lot against your weak matchup. In the 5 drops, we got Traitorous. As you guys probably know, I'm very high on this card. I think this card is very powerful. It allows you to basically deal with a unit that costs 3 or less and gain that unit for yourself. And if the unit you targeted with Traitorous was unexhausted, you get an unexhausted card for yourself. This is just an extremely impactful play. One of my favorite play is also to ramp into 5 resource and steal an opponent's Super Laser Technician, which is pretty much a game-winning play in this if you're playing against another ramp deck, which there's plenty of. And this can be a game-winning play that allows you to basically just steal the ramp for your opponent, and since the deck benefits so much from having extra ramp, it's just extremely impactful. It's also very strong in some of the most popular deck in the game, like Boba Green, who plays a lot of Boba Disintegrator and plays the 7th Fleet Defender. Those are some of the best 3-drop in the game if you can steal them. Very extremely impactful. It is the only upgrade in the deck, so if your opponent wants to run, if you expect someone to be running anti-upgrades after Sideboard, you can just very easily Sideboard out those Traitorous to make space for your deck. Moving on, we got Ruthless Raider. And the Ruthless Raider is going to be our 6-drop. So the advantage of it is once again comes to play, have an immediate impact on the game. Give us some board presence in space once again that we are usually don't have a lot of normally. And combining with Energy Conversion Lab, it can actually kill the dreaded Fire Spray, which is a very impactful play. So it's a very powerful card. The fact that it has impact on the game when it comes to play and also when it gets killed is just very powerful. And it's just a great card in my opinion in any mid-range. And honestly, any red-black deck should run Ruthless Raider in my opinion. Moving on, we got obviously the best 7-drop in the game, Darth Vader commanding the First Legion. This card is obviously amazing in this deck because we have all the ramp that allows us to play that card earlier than normal. This is where we really start to reach the late game cards that make our deck extremely powerful in the late game, and Darth Vader is a big reason for this. So typically for Darth Vader, we are going to be looking for 2 different kind of cards. So either we are ahead and we want to put more pressure on the opponent. This way, the ideal combination of cards we want is a Seasoned Shore Trooper and a Death Star Stormtrooper. So another benefit of running the Death Star Stormtrooper is that it allows us to we can get a 2-drop and a 1-drop to basically put 2 cards on the battlefield at the same time, which is very impactful. If we are behind, the card that we're going to be looking for the most is going to be the Cell Block Guard, to kind of block the arena and kind of stabilize the board and give us an extra Sentinel unit. Obviously, we can also play Viper Prop Droid or Super Laser Technician, but those are obviously not the ideal. So, extremely impactful card. I don't think I need to introduce to anyone. I think anybody who's played the pre-release probably has seen how powerful this card is. And in Constructed, it is just as good. Another great 8-drop, in my opinion the best 8-drop in the game, and another great reason to be playing Vader is to have access to Emperor Palpatine. So Emperor Palpatine comes into play, it's almost like an overwhelming barrage on a stick. So you get this 6-stick overwhelm, and then it can kill multiple units and it comes to play, or kill one large unit. It is expensive, but once again, with the ramp, it's relatively realistic to get into it, and it's just an extremely impactful play. And in my opinion, one of the main reasons why Vader is such a powerful late game deck is obviously because the leader himself is very powerful and very expensive and powerful, but also because it has access to Palpatine. Another excellent 8-drop that we are running as well is Reinforcement Walker. Reinforcement Walker is extremely complementary with Palpatine. Palpatine is excellent to stabilize the board and kill multiple units at once. Walker is going to be the unit that we're going to be running if we manage to stabilize the board and we want to get value. If we are running against a control deck, most likely we're going to put this as a huge threat that draws us card. And if we're running against aggro, we're going to be healing our base to put ourselves out of range for a cause I believe in. The healing is particularly precious for and important for a Vader deck because Vader does not play blue, doesn't have access to healing, so at least easy healing. So Reinforcement Walker is here to help us on that front. So those are the what I call the drops. So the card that we want to play specifically on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I'm going to talk about cards that are a bit more circumstantial, they're a bit more reactive, that the card that we're going to be running, that we're going to be playing in specific in moments where we need answers. So first of all, we got False Choke, which is another big reason to be playing red-black. It is an excellent removal. Talking about the card that allows us to stall the game and buys us some time before we reach the late game, False Choke is probably one of the best cards you can hope for. Yes, you make your opponent draw a card, but that is unlikely to matter until you reach the later stage of the game. And in the later stage of the game, we are going to be in a very good position anyway. So False Choke is just an excellent card for this. Deals something that has 5, so even like a Sabine that has been boosted by a wing leader can basically be out of reach, and False Choke can really much deal with that for a very cheap cost, which is excellent. Though the discount is not super relevant, we do play a few force unit, but honestly the main purpose, even for 2 resources, still an excellent card. Just be careful to not play this card too aggressively in the later, once you are starting to get into top deck situation. Be very careful what you play False Choke on in the later stage of the game, because the card draw in this stage can be very important. Okay, Open Fire is the other removal spell, which is a removal event, sorry, and it completes False Choke very well. False Choke is great, but that cannot interact with space. Open Fire allows us to do that. So it's a much better card in that sense. It's a much more flexible card. So it's a card that I would advise you to take, because otherwise you're going to be missing some answers in space if you don't run that card. So it allows us to really interact with space as much as an aggro deck like to be playing on both arena to take you off guard. So Open Fire is a great way to deal with that. Next we got the newest card in the block here, the Bombing Run. So Bombing Run is here as you can expect, a board stabilizer, as a way to kill multiple units at once, and kill multiple units at once. I like to call it the poor man overwhelming barrage. Barrage is obviously a much better card, but bombing run has the advantage of working even if we don't have any unit in play. And so the fact that you can choose the arena is very relevant, and most likely we're going to be using this arena to deal with the space arena and deal with multiple units in space arena. It's a card that we have that is mostly here to fix our bad matchups, and it's a card that we can sideboard out relatively easily if we're not running against a deck in which this card is good against. Next we got Overwhelming Barrage, which as you know is the best card in the game. Just an excellent board stabilizer that also gives us the +2/+2 bonus to kill something very large. It's an absolute auto-include in all black-green deck, and I think in the Vader deck it is particularly powerful because we have tons of units with high attack value that can really benefit from it. It's just an excellent card. And I think we are about done with the main deck. So as you can see, units that can trade with the opponent units early on in the game. Very efficient set of removal events. And some super powerful late game to overpower our opponent in the later stage of the game. And that's what this deck is all about. So now let's talk a little bit about the sideboard. So something interesting about the sideboard is that usually sideboard is used to compensate the weaknesses of the deck. But so basically the big story is that Vader is an excellent deck against pretty much everything in the game excepted aggro. Aggro is the Achilles heel of the Vader deck. It's really its major weakness. The reason why Vader struggles so much against aggro is because naturally aggro does relatively well against control by nature, and in order to make up for that, control deck usually get a lot of healing. Card like For a Cause I believe in are an extremely big problem for Vader, because even when Vader managed to stabilize the board, it's gonna have difficulty to put itself out of range of For a Cause I believe in, because you're running a 25 HP base and we don't have any healing, at least no reliable healing. In order to compensate for this, you would think that I would have a sideboard that is very dedicated to fight aggro, and I used to do that, and then I just realized that I can make my aggro matchup even better by basically placing cards that I would normally play in sideboard. I would play them in the main deck instead. So all my anti-aggro cards, which are basically Consultum Star Viper, Cell Block Guard, and Bombing Run, which are cards which I normally would play in sideboard, I put them in the main deck in order to make my aggro matchup even better. So the next step, whenever you have a weak matchup, is in putting a lot of sideboard cards is not enough, is to put those sideboard cards in the main deck to improve the matchup even more. With that being said, this is something you can do in Star Wars Unlimited, because Star Wars Unlimited allows you to, with a resource system, if you find cards that are bad in certain matchup, like for example Star Viper would be a relatively bad card against a deck that is not an aggro deck, you can simply resource them. So which means that you can really, Star Wars Unlimited is one of the few games where you can really afford to run sideboard cards in the main deck, as opposed to Magic, for example, where that would be a big problem to do that. So because our main deck is almost entirely focused on beating aggro, our sideboard is almost entirely focused on improving the control matchups. So without further ado, let's go into my anti-control package. And my first card that I like is Admiral Pet. So one of the ways you can improve your late game is by adding more late game cards, right? The problem is that the deck is already running 8 cards that cost 7 and more. We have a few more that we're adding after sideboard. But then beyond that point, adding even more late game cards start to become counterproductive, because you end up in a situation where you just have a bunch of super late game cards, and sometimes improving your late game, you reach a certain point where adding more late game card does not really help. And one of the ways you can improve your late game without adding more late game card is to have early games that makes your late game card stronger. And obviously Piet is a perfect example for this. You play this card, so obviously, and then suddenly your late game cards get ambush. This card is very powerful with Ruthless Raider, giving ambush to Ruthless Raider very strong. It's very powerful with Palpatine, but where it really shined the most is in combination with Reinforcement Walker. And after Sideboard, we also adding a third copy of Reinforcement Walker. And Reinforcement Walker Piet is one of the strongest late game combo in the game. You play Reinforcement Walker, you get a first trigger that allows you to heal or draw a card, and then attacking right away without Reinforcement Walker, you get a second trigger. So this card is just extremely deadly. One of the tips I can give you about Piet is to not play this card too early in the game. Don't play this card necessarily on turn 1 if you can avoid it, because your opponent will deal with him if you give him a lot of time to deal with him. Eventually, the opponents can say, oh, okay, well, I have until turn 6 to kill that guy, so that's fine. I have until turn 5 to kill that guy, so that's fine. I can wait. If you run Piet later on in the game, where there are other things going on, where there are other threats to deal with, Piet is much more impactful because suddenly the timing window that you're giving to your opponent to react to it is much smaller. So typically Piet is, once again, depending on the situation, is a card that I would rather play on turn 3, obviously before my late game cards arrive, but at the moment where the timing window for my opponent to react to it is going to be a little more limited. It's also a card that I love to get from Vader. If I'm playing Vader and I can find a Piet, I'm really happy about this because suddenly after 7 comes 8. So I'm giving once again a very small timing window for my opponent to react to Piet, and then on the next turn I can play a Walker or Palpatine with ambush and completely take over the game. Then I got 2 copies of Snowtrooper Lieutenant. So Snowtrooper Lieutenant is the only card that I've decided to include to improve my aggro matchup a little bit. The idea is to give us a little bit more interaction in the early stages of the game against aggro, and to replace some of the cards that are not great against aggro but that you need in other matchups. So I still have a couple of anti-aggro cards in the sideboard, and this is going to be Snowtrooper Lieutenant. Typically it's going to replace some of the ramping against aggro is not a great idea, and Snowtrooper Lieutenant really kind of help with that, replacing those ramps with more pro action, and Snowtrooper is here for that. Next we got Disabling Fank Fighter, which is obviously an anti-upgrade card. So typically against deck that runs a lot of upgrade. It's also a card that we're happy to get against aggro because it gives us extra interaction in space. A third copy of Reinforcement Walkers comes after Sideboard because it's such a great combo with Piet, and typically it's going to be very good against control matchups. And obviously we got the ultimate late game machine, 2 copies of Devastator, in order to once again overpower our opponent into the late game. Devastator is particularly good in this deck because we have so many ramp, and getting to 10 resources is then pretty possible. And it's also a great card with Piet, by the way, if you get to basically ambush into Devastator into something that is in benefit from the overwhelm. It's just extremely powerful. And that's it for the deck. So for talking about the different matchups that this deck has, it's a deck that has a pretty good matchup against Boba Green. Because the Boba Green typically is not fast enough to kill us before we come online, and once we come online, we usually will win the game because our late game is simply much better. Obviously, Boba is such a powerful deck that even the deck which are supposed to have a good matchup against it don't have an amazing matchup against it. So don't expect a 70% win rate, but I think it's reasonable to say that he has a 55 to 60% win rate against Boba. Something to bear in mind is, I think among the decks that pretends to have a good matchup against Boba, probably Vader Green is one that is the most real, where I think this deck is one of the decks in the game that has the best matchup against Boba in general. It has a good matchup against control. We saw this recently during the TTS Top Cut tournament. Vika was running a Vader green deck. I mean, he was running a very different version than this one, a much more force-oriented version. But he had very good success, and he's beaten, I think, 3 Iden green deck in a row almost. So really good matchup against. He has proven that Vader really does a great against control. Obviously, the weakness of Vader is aggro. The reason why aggro is such a weak matchup, so I already explained earlier. There's another element that makes aggro relatively a very weak matchup for the deck is obviously the fact that your Vader took so long to deploy. Very often running against aggro means not having your leader for a significant amount of time. I remember running Vader Ramp against aggro, and I played like 4 games and I did not manage to deploy my Vader a single time in 4 games, which was pretty crazy. I still won one of those 2 matches, by the way, so I still won like 3 games out of the 6 I run. But that was without my Vader, so that was kind of crazy. And that's definitely one of the major weaknesses, and this is something that cannot really be fixed. But obviously, I do everything I can to mitigate that matchup and try to make it as good as it can be, in order to have a relatively balanced deck. There are going to be other Vader Ramp deck that you're going to see out there, and I think this version is the most balanced. It's the one that puts the odds. It's the one that's performed the best against aggro. So even though it still has a relatively bad matchup against aggro, it's definitely any other version of Ramp that you're going to see is unlikely to have as good as a matchup against aggro, unless they're making like crazy changes. But I think this is as close to a good matchup to aggro you can possibly be, from my experience at least. So I've had some requests earlier to tell me what kind of a mulligan guide and kind of do some hand opening and kind of see what would be my thought process into those mulligans. So thankfully on Star Wars DB we have a way to test that out. So I'll show you exactly what kind of hand I would keep, what kind of card I would resource. Okay, so this is an opening hand. So something that you're looking for whenever you're playing Vader Green is that you're looking to get as many ramp as possible. And it's really a deck that benefits from having multiple ramp. And this hand against anything else that is, if I'm not running against aggro, this hand is excellent because it has 2 ramp in there. I would obviously resource the Cell Block Guard, and maybe I would resource the Palatine because I will open to draw. But then I would obviously go turn 1. You don't have anything to play. Missing your turn 1 play if you're not playing as aggro is not the end of the world. On turn 2 we can go Super Laser Technician combined with the Vader's ability to kill a unit that has 3 health and stabilize the board as well as ramping at the same time. And a turn after we can go Resupply and double ramp, and Vader that comes to play 2 turns earlier is just extremely impactful. You can even play, if you think that you're playing against a deck that doesn't have a lot of space, you can also resource the Interceptor instead of Palatine and keeping the Palatine. That's also a completely valid play. Also keep in mind, there's also an argument to not use, if on turn 2 you find a 3rd ramp card, you can go for the Darth Vader turn 3 play that I was talking about earlier, in which case you don't want to use ECL to ambush the Super Laser Technician. You want to play it normally and then keep it for, and keeping the ECL for the turn after to be able to go for the double round the turn after. Yeah, so against aggro, however, this is the hand I would obviously mulligan. If you don't have a turn 1 play against aggro, it's a death sentence. So I would mulligan this hand against aggro. So it really depends on what you're playing against. Okay, let's try a new hand. Okay, so this hand is a lot more drastic. It does have a ramp, and it does have a force choke. So if opponent plays something early on, we can force choke it. If it's a space unit, we have the Interceptor to deal with it. It has a ramp. I would obviously resource the 2 Interceptor to only keep 1. But this is a hand that I would keep, personally. I think it's not a bad hand. Against aggro, it's a little bit risky because if you play space unit, then you have to wait until Interceptor. So against aggro, I would debate it a little bit more. But against any other deck, I would keep this hand. Oh, clear. Okay, this is a very good hand against both and very flexible. So we got a ramp, which is all we need. We have the turn 1 Death Star Stormtrooper we can combine with the ping. On turn 2, if we play against aggro, we can run the Star Viper. If we're not running against aggro, we can run the Super Laser Technician. You can resource the Reinforcement Walker and probably the Bombing Run as well. Open Fire gives you the thing you a flexible answer as well. So it's a pretty balanced hand. It's a really good hand. If you're running in someone that is not an aggro deck, I would probably resource the Star Viper and keep the Walker. Okay, this hand is also excellent. You get a turn 1 Seasoned Short Trooper, turn 2 Super Laser Technician, and then you can go into Bombing Run, into Barrage. Barrage, Short Trooper goes hand in hand, and then Interceptor. Depending on what I'm running against, I would probably resource the Bombing Run and one of the Short Troopers. And one last hand. Okay, so this hand is a lot worse because it doesn't have a ramp. Any hand that doesn't have ramp, I would mulligan, unless I'm playing against aggro. So against aggro, this hand is very valid. We got turn 1 Short Trooper, turn 2 Sublord Guard, some answers in space if you haven't placed in space. So this hand is very good against aggro, but against another deck, I would consider mulliganing this hand. So let's say we mulligan, and you see this hand is much better. We got a turn 1 Short Trooper or turn 1 Death Star Stormtrooper, depending on the situation. Turn 2 Resupply or turn 2 Star Viper, and then we got the late game cards. Just excellent. So I hope this was enough of an idea to see kind of how the deck runs. And thank you so much for following this video, and we'll see you next time